Hey everybody, welcome to week 2. We're going to take a quick short break from our email unit for this first activity of the week to talk a little bit about some things that I, as your teacher, am going to ask and expect of you this school year. Some people might think about these as my class rules, but the way I've heard it phrased and the way I like to think of this is these are habits of learning that we are trying to develop that will contribute to a healthy classroom, which is what I would like to have this year, whether we are virtual or whether we are in person in the second part of the year. So here's my goal for this lesson. I would love for you to be, by the end of this lesson, at least starting to think about being committed to growing in these 4 habits of learning: curious thinking, courageous designing, gracious communicating, and joy filled collaborating. So let's talk about what each one of these are. Let's start with curious thinking. One thing I'm going to ask of all of you this year is that you be curious, that you try and grow in curiosity. Some of the things that curious thinkers do are ask questions. Sometimes you ask questions because you don't know something. Sometimes you ask questions because you want to dig deeper. Curious thinkers also share their ideas, but they also consider other people's ideas. And lastly, curious thinkers aren't afraid to be creative. I hope that you feel safe this year to express your understanding in creative ways. So I'm going to ask you this year to try and grow as a curious thinker. Let's talk about the next one: courageous designing. A courageous designer is willing to try something new, even if they might not have done it before, or even if they might not be successful at it the first time. I'm going to ask you to try and be courageous this year. Courageous designers put thought and effort into their work. So I'm going to expect and ask from you this year that the work that you submit, both sharing with your writing group, but also turning into me, is work that reflects your best, that you tried your best. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but that you put thought into it. And last but not least, something I'm going to expect from you this year, of you and myself, is that you're willing to try again. Especially with writing, writing becomes good when it's improved over time, after draft after draft. And I hope that you, as a courageous designer, are willing to go through that work of improving your writing. Another thing that I'm going to ask and expect of you this year is that you are a gracious communicator. The word gracious means full of grace, full of goodness. And so here are some things that gracious communicators do. They're grateful. They express gratitude for what we have. They're kind, and they're encouraging. And so I'm going to expect that whether we're in person or whether we're online, that the way that you write, type, talk, chat with each other are those things: grateful and kind and encouraging. And last but not least, joy-filled collaborating. Collaborating means working together. Now, it's sort of hard to collaborate online, but there are lots of tools that can help us do this. But I'm going to ask you, even if you feel a little bit nervous about doing this up front, that you step out and decide to work with others this school year in my class. So, joy-filled collaborating means that you're considerate of others. You think about your group members. You're specific and helpful. So when you're in your writing group and you're giving feedback to somebody on their writing to help them make it better, that you're specific. You offer specific detail. You're trying to help them. Joy-filled collaborating means you also listen to other people's ideas, but that you also add your own. And I'm excited to try and do some collaborating this year, even if it has to be virtual collaboration. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But just going back to summarizing these are the 4 areas that I'm going to expect from you and from myself, and I'm going to ask that we commit to getting better and better at these. Are we going to do these 4 things perfectly all the time? No. But there are things that we're going to hopefully work towards: curious thinking, courageous designing, gracious communicating, and joy-filled collaborating. So let's talk a little bit about one of them specifically, which is gracious communicating. Today, your task is going to be to go online to Seesaw and go to your writing group's blog and take a look at the other people in your group's introductions that they posted last week. And I'm going to ask you to communicate with each other, to introduce yourselves and have a little bit of a discussion. But I want to start by upfront talking about what might it look like to communicate graciously online. So here are just a couple of things that I'm going to ask of you today, starting today, and practice these things today, but then moving forward in the school year. So first of all, please be positive and encouraging. When somebody posts something or they put a piece of writing or their introduction out there, they're sharing a bit of themselves. And so there's no space for smirking at or making fun of anybody. Just like we would in person. So I'm going to ask you to be positive, be encouraging to people. Second, I encourage you to ask others questions. When you ask people questions, you demonstrate to them that you want to know more about them. You want to get to know them. And so today, when you look at people's introductions, I encourage you, think about what's a question I could ask this person. And then also, if someone asks you a question, reply to questions that are asked of you. Another thing with online communication is I encourage you, and I expect that you'll avoid using 1 or 2 word replies only, like cool or I agree. Sometimes those can be appropriate, but for most of the time, that's just the easy way out. It's communicating to your group that you don't really want to take the work of making a thoughtful reply. So I encourage you to actually ask a question or add some new information rather than just writing cool or I agree. Another one is to respect differences of opinion. It's okay. In fact, it's good to disagree with others sometimes. We learn when we disagree. But sometimes when we're online, it can be really easy to just dismiss or talk down someone else's opinion. And unfortunately, social media in some ways encourages that. But I'd really challenge you that if someone posts something that you disagree with, respond politely. Say, I disagree because, or I want to learn more about why you think that. And the last one on here is something that I'm really going to ask you all to commit to, which is that you keep your group's discussions within your group. I've put you in these small writing groups, and I'm going to ask you to keep what's said in your group so that you can all feel like that it's a safe space. So I expect that I would never hear of somebody taking a screenshot of something that someone in your writing group wrote and posted it somewhere else. I want it to feel that it's safe and that you all respect each other's privacy within your small discussion group. Okay, so today, here's what I'd like you to do now that we've talked about this. I'm going to ask you all to open up your Seesaw, and you can just click on Seesaw to go there. And it'll take you to the login page. You may already be logged in. I'm a student. Click sign in with Google, and I'm going to sign in as the generic 7th grader account. And once you are in your communications writing group in Seesaw, you should see your posts that you made last week. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to go over here on the right-hand side to the blog and click on blog. And when you do that, you can see in my example, there's only one post because this is just an example. But if everybody in your small group was able to complete activity 2 last week, I believe it was, then you should see 4 or 5 or maybe 6 different introductions here. Some of them will be written as notes. Some of them will be videos, depending on what people chose. But your task today is to go through and just take a look at those. They shouldn't take you more than probably 5 or 6 minutes, but I would like you to read everybody's. And then your next step is I am going to ask you to comment, to add a comment to at least 3 different people in your group. You can do more. You can reply to everybody. I would love it if you did, but a minimum of 3. Okay? And again, I'm asking you to make thoughtful replies, not just hi, but I'd like you to be thoughtful. So, for example, in my introduction video, I talked about camping with my family. So maybe you're going to ask a follow-up question and say something like, "Hello, Mr. Nielsen. It's good to have you in our writing group. Where did specifically did your family go camping?" So I talked about camping with my family. You can ask a follow-up question and say, "Where did you go camping?" So I can tell that you actually listened to what I shared, and you're going to ask me a question about it. Okay? This would be an example of a good reply. Another thing to do is welcome the person that you are discussing. Say, "Hey, I'm glad to be in this group with you. Hey, welcome. Thanks for sharing." Thank them for their introduction. And then once you've finished typing your post or your comment, hit this post button. So again, I'm going to ask you to view everybody's introduction post that is on the blog, but I'm requiring that you reply to 3 of them. Now, one last thing is you may have to come back to this later in the week, but I would like you to check back here later so that if people ask you questions, you can reply to them. Anyways, that's it for today. Your work is to hopefully start having that online discussion in the class blog about your introductions. All right, have a great